New Mexico, 1885. A land where ancient spirits and frontier struggles intertwine across dusty mesas and towering pine forests. For 8-year-old Eliza Thornton, the vast wilderness of the Sacramento Mountains represented not just home, but a sanctuary, where she found comfort after losing her mother to tuberculosis the previous winter. Her small hands, once used for helping with kitchen chores and tending the garden alongside her mother, now carried the weight of solitude and unspoken grief. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The modest homestead where Eliza lived with her father Thomas sat on 40 acres of rugged land, nestled between ancient juniper trees and limestone ridges, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor and 15 from the small settlement of Pine Springs. To most children her age, such isolation would seem frightening, but to Eliza, the wild landscape had become her closest companion in the months since her mother's passing. No one could have foreseen the extraordinary chain of events that awaited her beneath the shadow of those ageless mountains. Before we venture deeper into this remarkable tale, understand that some stories transcend ordinary understanding, challenging us to open our hearts to possibilities that exist beyond the boundaries of common experience. The late June heat shimmered across the rocky terrain as Eliza finished collecting water from the creek that cut through their property. 4 months of helping her father maintain their homestead had transformed her. Her once soft, pale hands now showed the beginnings of calluses, her sun-kissed face framed by auburn hair that refused to stay confined in the simple braid she attempted each morning. Dawn had broken 3 hours earlier, the sky transitioning from dusty rose to the clear, vibrant blue that made the distant mountain peaks appear painted against a perfect canvas. Eliza worked methodically, filling the second wooden bucket from the flowing creek, creating a quiet rhythm that helped quiet her thoughts. Each dipperful poured carefully into the bucket meant water for the small garden that provided their vegetables, for washing clothes, and for her father's needs when he returned from hunting. Her dog Scout, a mottled hound of uncertain ancestry, her father had brought home from a trading post in Pine Springs, lay nearby in the shade of a cottonwood, occasionally lifting his head at unfamiliar sounds before settling back into watchful rest. The animal had proven an unexpectedly loyal guardian, alert to Eliza's moods and protective without being aggressive. "Almost done, Scout," Eliza called, her voice clear in the morning air. Scout's ears perked up at her voice, tail sweeping the dusty ground in acknowledgement. 2 more bucketfuls and she'd have enough to last until evening, when the day's heat would fade, and she could return for more without risking sunburn. Eliza paused, wiping her brow as she surveyed her surroundings. The isolation that had initially frightened her after her mother's death had gradually become comforting, particularly in moments when the vastness of the landscape seemed to mirror the expansiveness of her thoughts. Her home, a sturdy structure of hand-hewn logs and fieldstone that her father had built with his own hands, sat perched on a gentle rise about a 1/4 mile from the creek. A small garden plot stretched beside it, rows of corn, beans, and squash, growing in the traditional companion planting method her mother had learned from a mescalero woman who occasionally traded herbs and medicines in Pine Springs. Their nearest neighbors, the Prescott family, lived across the valley, their homestead visible only as a distant smudge of smoke on clear mornings. Eliza was struggling to lift the now full bucket when Scout suddenly jumped to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The dog's gaze fixed on the bend in the creek where it disappeared into a thicket of willows and cottonwoods, his posture alert but not yet aggressive. "What is it, boy?" Eliza asked, instinctively stepping closer to her dog. Few travelers passed through this remote stretch of creek, and unexpected visitors were rare enough to merit caution. At first, she saw nothing beyond the rustling leaves and swaying branches. Then movement caught her eye, a figure half crawling, half dragging himself from the creek's edge. As the stranger drew closer, Eliza could make out a young Apache. Man, perhaps no older than 20 summers. His buckskin leggings darkened with what appeared to be blood from a wound on his thigh. His chest heaved with labored breathing, and his face, though composed, showed lines of pain around his eyes and mouth. Scout's growl intensified, but he remained beside Eliza, awaiting her command rather than charging forward. Something in the wounded man's approach, the deliberate, non-threatening nature of his movements despite his obvious injury, kept the dog from full alarm. "Scout, stay," Eliza commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Her father had taught her to be wary of strangers, especially given the tensions between settlers and Apache bands that occasionally flared in the territory. But something in the young man's pain-filled eyes spoke of desperation rather than threat. The Apache brave halted his painful progress, remaining on one knee about 10 yards from Eliza. He made no move to stand, perhaps recognizing how frightening his appearance might be to a young girl alone at the creek. When he spoke, his voice was strained but controlled, the English heavily accented but understandable. "Water," he said simply, gesturing first to his wound and then to his lips. Eliza hesitated. Her father would likely tell her to run home immediately, to bar the door and wait for his return. The newspapers that occasionally reached Pine Springs told frightening stories of conflicts between settlers and various Apache bands. Yet her mother had always insisted that kindness should transcend fear, that human suffering demanded response regardless of who suffered. "You're hurt," Eliza stated, taking a tentative step forward. Scout moved with her, still alert but following her lead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The young Apache nodded once, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "Hunters," he explained tersely. "Not my people. Followed me 2 days." Eliza glanced toward home, weighing her options. Her father wouldn't return until sunset, having left before dawn to check his trapping lines in the high country. The Prescotts were too far to call for help. The decision, she realized, was entirely her own. "I have water," she said finally, unscrewing the small canteen she carried for her own use during chores. It wasn't much, but it was cool and clean. She approached cautiously, Scout at her side, and extended the canteen while maintaining what she hoped was a safe distance. The young man made no sudden movements. He accepted the canteen with a nod of acknowledgement that somehow conveyed more gratitude than words might have. His hands, Eliza noticed, were strong and calloused but moved with surprising gentleness. As he first poured a small amount over his wound, a deep gash, that had been roughly bound with a strip of buckskin, before taking a measured drink. "Thank you, little one," he said, offering the canteen back with about half its contents remaining. "I am called Swift Hawk of the Mescalero people." "I'm Eliza," she replied, surprised by her own willingness to share her name. "Eliza Thornton." Swift Hawk nodded, his expression revealing nothing beyond a composed acknowledgement. He attempted to rise but faltered, his injured leg clearly unable to bear weight. A flash of frustration crossed his features before being quickly mastered. "The hunters who follow," he explained, gesturing vaguely westward. "They seek Apache scouts who guide the blue coats. I am no scout, but they do not ask before shooting." Eliza understood enough from her father's conversations with other settlers to know that some Apache served as scouts for the U.S. cavalry, while others maintained resistance. These divisions created dangerous misunderstandings and sometimes deadly consequences for innocent people caught between forces they couldn't control. "Our home is just there," she said, pointing toward the cabin on the rise. "My father won't be back until sunset, but—" She hesitated, knowing she was crossing a boundary her father would likely forbid. "You could rest in our barn until your leg is stronger." Swift Hawk studied her with unexpected intensity, as though assessing something far beyond her simple offer of shelter. "Why would you help an Apache, little one?" Your people and mine often walk different paths. My mother said that before we are settlers or Apache or anything else, we are all people, Eliza answered, the words coming naturally, though she'd never had occasion to voice this inherited wisdom before. And people help people who are hurt. A look of surprise, quickly controlled, crossed Swift Hawk's face. He remained silent for a long moment, before inclining his head in a gesture that somehow conveyed both dignity and genuine appreciation. Your mother speaks with wisdom, he said simply. I accept your kindness. Helping the wounded brave to the barn proved more challenging than Eliza had anticipated. Despite his obvious strength and determination, Swift Hawk's injury made the quarter-mile journey arduous. He fashioned a crude walking stick from a fallen branch, and Eliza offered her shoulder for support, though the difference in their heights made this somewhat impractical. Scouts circled them warily, occasionally rushing ahead to bark at imagined threats before returning to their slow procession. The journey that would normally take Eliza 5 minutes stretched to nearly half an hour. By the time they reached the weathered barn, a structure smaller than the main cabin but solidly built to withstand mountain winters, Swift Hawk's face had grown alarmingly pale beneath its natural copper tone, and his breathing had become more labored. Inside, Eliza quickly arranged a bed of clean straw covered with an old horse blanket her father kept for their mule, Samson, who was currently accompanying Thomas on his hunting expedition. Swift Hawk lowered himself onto this makeshift bed with a barely suppressed groan, his composed expression finally betraying the extent of his pain. I need to clean your wound, Eliza said with more confidence than she felt. She had assisted her mother in tending injuries before, cuts from axes, burns from cook stoves, even helping set Mr. Prescott's broken arm when he fell from his barn roof the previous year. But those had been neighbors and family, not a wounded Apache brave who had enemies pursuing him. Swift Hawk nodded once, then reached for the crude bandage on his thigh. Arrow, he explained, unwrapping the buckskin to reveal an ugly wound. Broke it off, but the point remains inside. Eliza fought back a wave of nausea. This was far worse than anything she'd helped her mother treat. I don't know if I can. I will guide your hands, Swift Hawk interrupted, his voice calm despite his obvious pain. I cannot reach properly myself, or I would not ask this of a child. The next hour passed in a blur of focused intensity. Following Swift Hawk's patient instructions, Eliza boiled water from the creek in a small kettle over the outdoor fire pit, gathered clean cloths from the cabin, and brought her mother's medicine box, a treasured wooden chest containing herbs, tinctures, and salves collected and prepared during her mother's lifetime. Swift Hawk examined the contents with evident respect. Your mother knew plant medicine, he observed, selecting several items with surprising familiarity. These will help fight the fire that grows in wounds. Under his guidance, Eliza prepared a poultice of yarrow and comfrey, both of which her mother had grown specifically for treating injuries. The actual removal of the arrowhead proved the most difficult task. Swift Hawk bit down on a leather strap cut from his own belt while Eliza, her small hands shaking but determined, followed his instructions to extract the foreign object from his flesh. When the bloody arrowhead finally came free, Swift Hawk released a long, controlled breath. You have courage, little one, he said, his voice roughened by pain but tinged with genuine appreciation. Many grown warriors would hesitate to do what you have done. Eliza felt an unexpected surge of pride at his words. She finished cleaning the wound, applied the poultice Swift Hawk had helped prepare, and bound it with strips of clean cloth torn from an old sheet. You should rest now, she said, surprised by the authoritative tone that had entered her voice. It reminded her of her mother's healing voice, the no-nonsense tone she had used when tending to injuries or illness. Swift Hawk's lips curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. I will rest, he agreed. But first, I must ask, these hunters who follow me may come this way. If they find me here, it will bring danger to you and your father. The reality of the situation, temporarily forgotten in the intensity of treating his wound, crashed back upon Eliza. She was harboring a wounded Apache brave in her father's barn, while armed men possibly searched for him. Her father would be furious and frightened for her safety. "Will they come soon?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Swift Hawk considered this, his dark eyes thoughtful. "They are not good trackers. They lost my trail yesterday when I crossed the high ridge and doubled back. But they are persistent and angry. They may search this valley by tomorrow." "My father returns tonight," Eliza said, unsure whether this was reassuring or concerning given the circumstances. "I will be gone before dawn," Swift Hawk promised. "Once darkness falls, I can move without leaving a trail they can follow." He paused, studying her with that same penetrating gaze she had noticed at their first meeting. "You have done a great kindness, Eliza of the Thornton people, one that will not be forgotten. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. As afternoon progressed toward evening, Eliza divided her time between normal chores and checking on her unexpected guest. Swift Hawk slept for several hours, his body fighting to heal from both the wound and what must have been days of desperate flight across difficult terrain. When awake, he accepted small amounts of the cornbread and dried venison Eliza brought him, eating sparingly but with evident appreciation. During one of these visits, as the shadows lengthened across the barnyard, Swift Hawk reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew an object that caught the fading sunlight with surprising brilliance. "For water and healing," he said, extending his hand to reveal a pendant hanging from a leather cord. The piece was simple yet beautiful, a polished turquoise stone wrapped in intricate silver wire, with small beads of coral and jet creating a pattern Eliza didn't recognize. "Oh, I couldn't," she began, but Swift Hawk shook his head once, decisively. "Among my people, debts must be balanced," he explained. "You have given water and healing, I give protection." He held the pendant closer. "This stone comes from Sacred Mountains. It has been in my family for 3 generations. Now it passes to you." Eliza hesitated, understanding instinctively that this was no small gift. "Shouldn't you keep it? For your own protection?" A shadow of something, regret perhaps, or resignation, crossed Swift Hawk's features. "My path grows dangerous," he said simply. "Better it continues its purpose, with one whose heart is true." Slowly, Eliza accepted the pendant. As it settled into her palm, she was surprised by its weight, heavier than its size suggested, and by a curious warmth that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. "Wear it against your skin," Swift Hawk instructed. "When danger threatens, it will grow warm. When friends approach, it will grow cool." He touched it once more before withdrawing his hand. "The stone knows." Under normal circumstances, Eliza might have dismissed such claims as fantasy or the kind of superstitious talk her father scoffed at when traders passed through with tales of indigenous magic. But something in Swift Hawk's matter-of-fact delivery, coupled with the strange sense of connection she felt to the pendant itself, silenced her doubts. She slipped the leather cord over her head, tucking the turquoise beneath her simple cotton dress where it rested against her skin with that same curious warmth. "Thank you," she said simply, feeling that any elaborate expression of gratitude would somehow diminish the solemnity of the exchange. Swift Hawk nodded once, then turned his attention to the barn door. "Your father returns soon," he observed, though Eliza had heard nothing. "I must rest now, to have strength for traveling when the moon rises." As if on cue, Scout began barking. Outside, his familiar greeting rather than his warning, and Eliza heard the distant braying of Samson the mule. Her father was indeed returning, earlier than expected. "I'll bring food after supper," she promised, rising quickly. "And fresh water for your journey." Swift Hawk's only response was a slight inclination of his head, but his eyes conveyed a depth of meaning that transcended words. The evening unfolded in a haze of nervous anticipation for Eliza. Her father, fortunately, was too preoccupied with his successful hunt, a young deer that would provide meat for many days, to notice his daughter's distraction. Thomas Thornton was a quiet man at the best of times, made more so by grief over his wife's passing. This evening, his silence was a blessing, allowing Eliza to help prepare their simple meal without having to maintain conversation that might reveal her secret. As they ate venison stew by lamplight, Eliza found her hand repeatedly straying to the pendant hidden beneath her dress. Its warmth remained constant, neither increasing nor decreasing, offering strange comfort each time her fingers confirmed its presence. "You've been to the creek today?" her father asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had stretched between them. Eliza started, nearly choking on a piece of potato. "Yes," she managed after recovering. "This morning." "Filled the buckets." Thomas nodded absently. "Saw strange tracks along the north ridge today," he remarked, his weathered face showing little emotion, though his eyes had sharpened. "Apache, by the look of them. And not alone. 4, maybe 5 men following, moving fast." The pendant seemed to pulse once against Eliza's skin, a brief flare of heat that faded almost immediately. She fought to keep her expression neutral, focusing on her stew with feigned interest. "You stay close to the house tomorrow," her father continued, his tone shifting to one that permitted no argument. "No creek visits, no berry picking. Just garden work and indoor chores, until I'm certain who's moving through our valley and why." "Yes, father," Eliza agreed, relief flooding through her that his concern provided the perfect reason for her to remain near the barn without raising suspicion. After supper, while Thomas cleaned his hunting rifle by the fire, a nightly ritual that had taken on greater significance with his mention of Apache tracks, Eliza gathered a small bundle of food, wrapped carefully in a clean cloth. She waited for her father to become absorbed in his task before slipping outside under the pretense of checking that the chickens were secured for the night. The moon had risen, nearly full, casting silver light across the homestead. Scout accompanied her to the barn, his behavior remarkably calm considering the stranger within. Inside, Eliza found Swift Hawk already prepared for departure. He had fashioned a better walking stick from a piece of broken tool handle and had torn his damaged buckskin leggings to create a more secure bandage for his wound. "Your father knows of the hunters," he said immediately, confirming Eliza's suspicion that he had somehow overheard their conversation despite the distance between barn and cabin. "He saw tracks today," she confirmed, offering the bundle of food. "He says I must stay near the house tomorrow." Swift Hawk nodded, accepting the provisions with a gesture of thanks. "Your father is wise to be cautious. The men who follow me do not differentiate between Apache and those who help Apache." The implications of this statement sent a chill through Eliza despite the warmth of the summer evening. "Will they come here?" she asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "Their path leads west of your valley," Swift Hawk replied, his tone reassuring, though his eyes remained grave. "But they are unpredictable in their anger." He touched the knife at his belt, the only weapon he carried, his bow presumably lost during his flight. "I travel by moonlight to draw them further from your home." Eliza's hand went instinctively to the pendant beneath her dress. "You said this offers protection," she remembered. "Protection from what?" Swift Hawk's expression softened slightly, the closest he had come to a true smile in their brief acquaintance. "The stone has many purposes," he explained. "It connects the wearer to the spirits of land and ancestors. It warns of danger and guides toward safety. Most importantly, it marks you as one who has shown kindness to the Mescalero people. This marking cannot be seen by ordinary eyes, but those who know the old ways will recognize it." The explanation contained elements Eliza's practical frontier upbringing wanted to dismiss. Yet something in Swift Hawk's matter-of-fact delivery made skepticism feel more childish than belief. The pendant's consistent warmth against her skin seemed to underscore his words with physical evidence. "I should go," Swift Hawk said, rising carefully to test his injured leg. He winced but maintained his balance, clearly determined to depart regardless of his condition. "Many thanks, Eliza of the Thornton people. May your courage be remembered and your kindness returned. Will I see you again?" Eliza asked, surprised by how much she hoped the answer would be affirmative. Swift Hawk regarded her thoughtfully. "The paths of people cross in unexpected ways," he said finally, "especially when connected by debt and gratitude." He touched the pendant through the fabric of her dress, a gesture so brief it might have seemed improper under other circumstances, but which carried only ceremonial significance in the moment. The stone remembers, even when people forget. With those enigmatic words, he slipped through the barn door into the moonlit night. Despite his injury, he moved with remarkable stealth, becoming one with the shadows between buildings within moments. Scout watched his departure without alarm, offering no barking challenge to mark his passage. Within minutes, it was as if Swift Hawk had never been there at all, leaving Eliza to wonder if the entire extraordinary encounter might have been a dream, were it not for the solid reality of the pendant resting against her skin. She returned to the cabin, answering her father's distracted query about the chickens with a simple confirmation that all was secure. As she prepared for bed in the small alcove partitioned from the main room by a faded quilt hung from ceiling beams, Eliza found herself repeatedly touching the turquoise pendant, drawing comfort from its steady warmth. That night, her dreams were vivid and strange, filled with mountains she had never seen, people speaking in languages she didn't understand, and birds that transformed into warriors mid-flight. Throughout these dreams, the pendant featured prominently, sometimes growing to enormous size, other times multiplying until she wore dozens of identical stones that covered her like armor. She woke before dawn, pulled from sleep by Scout's low growling outside the cabin door. The sound held none of the frantic alarm that would signal immediate threat, but rather a sustained note of warning that suggested approaching strangers. The pendant against her chest had grown noticeably warmer, not uncomfortably so, but with an insistence that demanded attention. Eliza slipped from her bed, careful not to wake her father who slept soundly after his long day of hunting. Through the cabin's single window, she could see the first gray light of pre-dawn illuminating the yard. Scout stood rigid near the porch steps, his attention fixed on the tree line that bordered their property to the west. For several long moments, Eliza saw nothing beyond the dog's alert posture. Then movement caught her eye, not approaching the cabin directly, but skirting the edge of the cleared land, keeping to shadows. Not one figure but several, moving with the purposeful stealth of men tracking prey. The pendant flared against her skin, its heat now bordering on uncomfortable. "Danger," it seemed to say without words. "Danger approaches." Eliza stepped back from the window, heart pounding. She should wake her father immediately. His rifle and experience offered their best protection against whatever threat circled there. Home. Yet some instinct held her motionless, watching as the figures, 4 men dressed in a mixture of frontier clothing and military cast-offs, continued their careful circuit of the property, clearly searching for signs of passage. These must be the hunters Swift Hawk had fled, the men who pursued. Apache without concern for distinguishing between peaceful mescalero and hostile bands. Their methodical movement suggested they had lost their quarry's trail and were casting about for any indication of which direction he had taken. The pendant's heat intensified further, focusing particularly on the side that faced the approaching men. Eliza found her free hand moving to the cabin door's latch, not to open it, but to ensure it was securely fastened. As her fingers touched the cold metal, the pendant's heat suddenly shifted, cooling rapidly on the side, facing west while growing warmer on the eastern edge that pressed against her chest. Swift Hawk's words echoed in her memory. When danger threatens, it will grow warm. When friends approach, it will grow cool. Eliza turned slowly toward the eastern window, the one that overlooked the rising sun and the distant mountains beyond. Their valley. The pendant's heat had stabilized into a distinct pattern, cool on the western side where the hunters circled, warm on the eastern edge as if pointing her attention toward something approaching from that direction. Through this window, the pre-dawn light revealed nothing unusual at first glance, just the familiar landscape of juniper and pine, transitioning to rocky outcroppings as the land rose toward the mountains. Then, as the first true rays of sunlight crested the distant peaks, movement caught her eye. Riders appeared on the eastern ridge, at least a dozen, their silhouettes distinct against the brightening sky. Unlike the furtive movements of the hunters to the west, these figures made no attempt at concealment. They sat proudly on their horses, positioned in a line that suggested deliberate display rather than random arrangement. Even at this distance, Eliza could distinguish features that identified them unmistakably as Apache warriors, their distinctive headbands, the way they sat their horses without saddles, the lances and shields several carried. They remained motionless on the ridge, a tableau of watchful waiting that somehow conveyed more threat than any aggressive movement might have. The pendant had grown cool against her skin, despite the tension of the moment. Not danger, it seemed to suggest. Something else entirely. As Eliza watched, transfixed, one rider detached from the line and moved forward, descending the ridge. With measured pace. Even from a distance, there was something familiar in the rider's bearing, a quality of movement she recognized despite having seen him primarily wounded and in pain. Swift Hawk, the realization struck Eliza with certainty. Just as her father stirred behind her, roused by some sixth sense that had kept him alive through years of frontier living. "Eliza?" Thomas questioned, immediately alert despite having just awakened. "What are you looking at?" He joined her at the window, his body tensing as he took in both the warriors on the ridge and the rider approaching their cabin. "Get away." From the window, he ordered, reaching for his rifle. "Wait," Eliza said, her voice surprisingly steady. I think they're not here to harm us." The pendant had grown so cool, it almost seemed to pull heat from her skin rather than generate it, a sensation that conveyed reassurance despite its strangeness. Thomas frowned, clearly unconvinced, but something in his daughter's certainty gave him pause. Before he could respond, movement from the western edge of their property drew his attention. "Down," he hissed, pulling Eliza away from the window. "There are men circling the house." "I know," Eliza whispered. "4 of them. They've been searching since dawn." Her father's eyes narrowed with suspicion and concern. "How would you know that unless you've been watching them for some time? Eliza, what aren't you telling me?" The moment of reckoning had arrived sooner than Eliza had anticipated. She took a deep breath, her hand closing around the pendant beneath her dress, drawing courage from its reassuring coolness. "Yesterday," she began, "I found a wounded Apache brave by the creek. He was being hunted by those men. I helped him hide in our barn until nightfall and treated his wound. Before he left, he gave me this." She withdrew the pendant, letting it catch the strengthening dawnlight. "He said it would protect us." Thomas Thornton's expression transformed from confusion to anger to fear in rapid succession. "You brought an Apache to our home?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "With hostile hunters on his trail? Eliza, do you have any idea the danger you've placed us in?" "He needed help," Eliza replied simply. Mother would have helped him. The mention of her mother struck Thomas like a physical blow. He flinched, then subsided into momentary silence, emotions warring across his weathered features. "The approaching rider," he said finally, connecting the pieces. "That's him?" "The Apache you helped," Eliza nodded. His name is Swift Hawk. He's Mescalero. A sharp knock at the cabin door interrupted whatever response Thomas might have made. Father and daughter froze, exchanging a glance laden with unspoken questions. Scout, surprisingly, had stopped growling, though his alertness remained evident in his rigid posture visible through the window. "Thomas Thornton," called a voice from outside, not Swift Hawk's, but another man's, his English accented but clear. "We come in peace to speak with you and your daughter." Thomas hesitated, clearly torn between ingrained caution and the bizarre circumstances unfolding around them. Finally, rifle still in hand but pointed downward, he moved toward the door. "Stay behind me," he instructed Eliza firmly. When he opened the door, they found not just Swift Hawk, but 3 additional Apache warriors standing on their porch. Behind them, the remaining warriors had descended from the ridge and now formed a protective perimeter around the cabin, effectively encircling the hunters who had been searching the property. Swift Hawk had transformed from the wounded fugitive of yesterday into something altogether more imposing. Though his leg was clearly still bandaged beneath his buckskin leggings, he sat straight on his pinto pony, his bearing that of a man accustomed to respect. Beside him, an older warrior with gray streaks in his long hair and multiple feathers in his headband regarded Thomas and Eliza with penetrating intensity. "I am Cloud Maker, war chief of this Mescalero band." The older man introduced himself in accented but fluid English. "This young one," he gestured to Swift Hawk, "tells me your daughter has the courage of warriors twice her age and the healing hands of a medicine woman." His dark eyes shifted to Eliza, who found herself stepping forward despite her father's protective stance. The pendant had grown remarkably cool against her skin, almost cold now, as if responding to the proximity of these warriors with emphatic approval. "She helped one of our people when others would have turned away," Cloudmaker continued. "Such actions do not go unnoticed or unremembered among the Apache." Thomas cleared his throat, clearly struggling to find appropriate response to this unexpected situation. "My daughter has a kind heart," he said finally, "but I would have advised caution had I been consulted." He glanced pointedly at Eliza before returning his attention to the war chief. Cloudmaker's weathered face creased in what might have been amusement. "The young often act from heart rather than caution," he observed. "Sometimes the Creator's wisdom flows more purely through those who have not learned fear." He gestured toward the hunters, now effectively corralled by the circling Apache warriors. "These men have pursued our people across 3 valleys, shooting at any Apache they encounter without determining whether they face friend or enemy. They're bounty hunters," Thomas guessed, his expression darkening. "Looking to collect on Apache scalps without bothering to distinguish between peaceful bands and hostiles." Cloudmaker nodded once, approval flickering in his eyes at Thomas's understanding. "They will trouble this valley no more," he stated with quiet certainty that suggested the hunter's fate had already been determined, though whether that meant death or merely forcible removal remained unclear. Swift Hawk spoke for the first time, his gaze fixed on Eliza. "The stone guided us," he said, nodding toward the pendant now visible at her throat. "Its voice called to our scouts before dawn, leading us to these hunters' trail and to your home." Eliza's hand went instinctively to the turquoise, which had maintained its cool reassurance despite the tension of the moment. "You said it offered protection," she remembered. "I didn't understand how." "The stone knows those who deserve protection," Cloudmaker explained, exchanging a significant glance with Swift Hawk. "It has chosen you, little one, as you chose to help our wounded brother." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling to reconcile frontier superstition with the undeniable reality of Apache warriors surrounding his homestead in apparent response to his daughter's compassionate act. "What happens now?" he asked, directly, practical concerns asserting themselves. Cloudmaker's expression grew solemn. "The old ones among our people have consulted on this matter through the night," he said. They have red signs in the stars and in the smoke of sacred fires. They speak with one voice on what must follow. Eliza felt a curious absence of fear despite the chief's portentous words. The pendant's coolness seemed to spread throughout her body, creating a calm certainty that whatever came next was right and necessary, though she couldn't have explained this feeling in rational terms. The girl who shares water with wounded warriors, Cloudmaker continued, who tends enemies as if they were brothers, who wears the sacred stone as if born to its purpose. Such a one appears in our oldest prophecies. He extended his hand toward Eliza, palm upward in clear invitation. We would have you return with us to our camp at dawn's end, to be adopted into the people according to ancient ways. Thomas stepped forward immediately, protective instinct overriding diplomacy. My daughter stays with me, he stated firmly, though his tone remained respectful. I appreciate your gratitude for her help, but Eliza belongs here, with her family. Father, Eliza said softly, surprising herself as much as Thomas with her interruption. I think he means both of us. Cloudmaker's eyes crinkled with approval. The child understands what the father does not, he confirmed. We do not separate families, such cruelty belongs to others. His Cloudmaker's eyes crinkled with approval. The child understands what the father does not, he confirmed. We do not separate families, such cruelty belongs to others. His gaze shifted to Thomas. You have raised a daughter with wisdom beyond her years. Our invitation extends to both father and child. Come to our summer camp as honored guests, share our fire, learn our ways. The adoption ceremony would make Eliza a daughter of our people while she remains your daughter by birth. Thomas's expression revealed his internal struggle. Frontier caution warring with recognition of the extraordinary opportunity being offered. Relations between settlers and Apache were complex and often hostile, yet here stood a war chief extending formal invitation rather than threat. The hunters, Thomas said finally, practical concerns asserting themselves. What becomes of them? Justice, Cloudmaker replied simply. Not death, unless they force that outcome. They will be escorted far from these mountains with clear understanding of the consequences should they return. His tone suggested this was a concession rather than standard practice. This valley will be known to all Apache bands as protected ground because of your daughter's actions. Eliza found herself holding her breath as her father considered the war chief's words. The pendant at her throat pulsed gently, its temperature fluctuating in rhythm that somehow matched her heartbeat. How long would we stay among your people? Thomas asked finally, his question implying tentative acceptance rather than rejection. 7 days, Cloudmaker answered. The time needed for proper ceremonies and teaching. Your homestead will be watched over in your absence. He gestured toward the distant Prescott farm. Your neighbors need never know you were gone. Thomas glanced at Eliza, something in her expression apparently helping him reach decision. We accept your invitation, he said formally, lowering his rifle completely as a gesture of trust. Though we must secure our animals and home before departing. Cloudmaker nodded approval. Swift Hawk will assist while we deal with the hunters. Be ready to ride when the sun clears the eastern ridge. With that pronouncement, he turned his horse and rejoined the warriors who maintained their protective circle around the homestead. As the war chief departed, Swift Hawk dismounted carefully, his injured leg clearly still painful, though much improved from the previous day. The stone called to us through dreams, he explained to Eliza, gesturing toward her pendant. Many warriors saw you in their sleep, a small one with hair the color of autumn leaves, carrying water to the wounded and healing with brave hands. Thomas regarded the young warrior with mixture of caution and reluctant respect. You put my daughter at risk by coming here, he observed, though his tone lacked the anger such an accusation might normally carry. The risk existed before my arrival, Swift Hawk countered calmly. These hunters care nothing for the difference between child and warrior, settler and Apache. They kill for government bounties and take scalps as proof. His dark eyes held Thomas's gaze without wavering. Your daughter's compassion has gained you powerful allies in dangerous territory. Cloudmaker's protection extends beyond this ceremony. It becomes permanent alliance. The strategic implications of this statement weren't lost on Thomas. Living in isolated territory made the Thornton homestead vulnerable to threats from multiple sources: hostile bands, outlaws, even corrupt officials seeking to claim prime land through dubious means. Alliance with a respected Apache band offered protection that no amount of ammunition or reinforced doors could provide. Very well, Thomas acknowledged. Practical benefits overcoming lingering reservations. Let's secure the homestead. The next hour passed in efficient preparation. Thomas tended to livestock arrangements, ensuring the chickens had sufficient feed and water for their absence, and securing the mule in the barn with ample hay. Eliza gathered essential items for their journey: changes of clothing, her mother's hairbrush, a small wooden doll her father had carved for her 6th birthday. Swift Hawk moved between these activities, offering assistance where needed while maintaining respectful distance that acknowledged Thomas's authority over his household. He secured the cabin with surprising familiarity with settler ways, checking window latches and showing Thomas a method of barring the door that would prevent easy forced entry. "You know our ways well," Thomas observed as they completed these preparations. Swift Hawk's expression revealed little. "I have studied your people as you study game animals, learning habits to understand movements and intentions." "And what conclusions have you drawn?" Thomas asked, genuine curiosity breaking through lingering wariness. "That settlers are like Apache in most important ways," Swift Hawk replied after brief consideration. "They love their children, honor their ancestors, seek good hunting grounds, and defend their homes. The differences lie in how they see land, as something to be owned rather than something that owns them." The observation struck Thomas with unexpected force, articulating a distinction he had sensed but never fully formulated in his years on the frontier. Before he could respond, Cloudmaker returned. The hunters nowhere in sight, but clearly dealt with given the war chief's satisfied expression. "It is time," he announced simply. 2 additional warriors appeared leading horses, a sturdy paint mare for Thomas and a smaller, gentle-looking pony with distinctive black and white markings for Eliza. The girl approached her mount with mixture of excitement and trepidation. She had ridden before, but never far from the homestead, and certainly never to an Apache camp. The pendant cooled reassuringly against her skin as she reached for the pony, who nuzzled her palm with surprising affection for an unfamiliar animal. "She knows you," Swift Hawk observed, helping Eliza mount with careful hands. "Animals recognize those who carry the sacred stone." Within minutes, their small procession moved away from the homestead, Cloudmaker leading, flanked by senior warriors with Thomas and Eliza riding in protected position near the center of the group. Swift Hawk remained close to Eliza, occasionally offering quiet guidance on handling her mount over difficult terrain. Scout followed at Eliza's heels, accepted by the Apache without comment, despite not being invited. Their journey led eastward into increasingly rugged country, landscapes Eliza had seen only from distance during her father's occasional hunting expeditions. The Apache moved with remarkable efficiency, despite traveling with settlers unaccustomed to their pace, finding hidden paths through seemingly impassable terrain, crossing streams at precisely the right shallow points, and maintaining constant awareness of their surroundings that manifested as subtle hand signals passing between warriors. By midday, they had traveled farther from the homestead than Eliza had ever ventured. The familiar valley had given way to higher elevations where ponderosa pines created fragrant canopies overhead, and unexpected meadows appeared between rocky ridges, brilliant with summer wildflowers. Throughout this journey, Eliza found herself increasingly comfortable among the warriors their initial stern appearance softening through small kindnesses offered without fanfare, adjusting her stirrups without being asked, pointing out interesting plants or animal signs along the trail, ensuring she had water during brief rest periods. The pendant maintained its reassuring coolness against her skin, occasionally pulsing with subtle temperature changes that seemed to correspond with their passage through particular locations. Eliza noticed Swift Hawk watching her reactions during these moments, nodding slightly when she instinctively turned her head toward unusual rock formations or ancient trees that the other warriors acknowledged with brief gestures of respect. "The stone teaches you already," he observed during one such instance, as Eliza had found herself inexplicably drawn to touch a massive boulder covered with lichen, so old it had formed patterns resembling written symbols. "It recognizes places of power and helps you see them too." Thomas, riding nearby, overheard this exchange with an expression caught between frontier skepticism and reluctant wonder. The transformation in his daughter was subtle but unmistakable, a growing confidence in her interactions with both people and landscape, an awareness that seemed to extend beyond ordinary sight. "Your mother had something of this gift," he said quietly when they paused at a small spring to water the horses. "She always knew which plants would heal, which weather was coming, which visitors intended good or ill. I called it woman's intuition, to explain what I couldn't understand." Eliza looked up at her father with surprise. He rarely spoke of her mother in terms beyond practical remembrance of her cooking or gardening skills. This acknowledgement of something deeper, something that might connect Eliza to her mother in ways beyond memory, felt like precious gift. "Do you think she would approve?" Eliza asked, gesturing toward their Apache escorts and the journey they had undertaken. "Of us going to their camp?" Thomas considered this question with unusual thoughtfulness. "Your mother believed in building bridges rather than walls," he said finally. "She traded with Apache women at the settlement before you were born, learned their plant knowledge, shared her own remedies. She would have understood your choice to help Swift Hawk." He glanced at the pendant visible at Eliza's throat. "Whether she would have approved of all this, I can't say for certain. But she believed connections between people mattered more than differences." This conversation was interrupted by Cloudmaker's announcement that they would soon reach the camp. As if confirming his words, Eliza noticed thin wisps of smoke rising from the next valley, barely visible against the afternoon sky. The pendant grew noticeably cooler against her skin, its temperature dropping as if in anticipation. Their arrival at the Apache encampment proceeded with ceremony that seemed prepared despite the visitors' unexpected status. Warriors lined the final approach, standing at attention as Cloudmaker led Thomas and Eliza between their ranks. Women emerged from conical wickiups arranged in circular pattern around central clearing, their expressions revealing careful assessment rather than hostility. Children, previously engaged in games and chores, paused to stare openly at Eliza, particularly fascinated by her auburn hair, so different from their own midnight black. Eliza met their curious gazes with shy smiles, recognizing in their expressions the same mixture of caution and interest she herself felt. At the camp's center stood a group of elders, men and women of advanced years whose bearing conveyed authority beyond physical strength. Among them, distinguished by elaborate necklace of bear claws and turquoise, stood a woman whose deep-lined face and white hair suggested great age, yet whose posture remained proudly erect. Her eyes, when they fixed on Eliza, held penetrating quality that seemed to look through rather than at the girl. "Sees beyond," Cloudmaker announced with profound respect, inclining his head toward the elderly woman, "our most revered medicine woman. She foresaw your coming 3 moons ago." The old woman approached with measured steps, her gaze never leaving Eliza. When she stood before the girl, she extended gnarled hands in clear invitation. Eliza, responding to instinct rather than instruction, placed her small palms atop the elder's weathered ones. The moment their hands connected, The pendant at Eliza's throat flared with sudden coolness, so intense it nearly took her breath away. Simultaneously, the turquoise stones in seas beyond's elaborate necklace seemed to catch the sunlight with unusual brilliance, glowing with inner fire that couldn't be explained by mere reflection. "The circle completes," Seas Beyond announced, her voice surprisingly strong and clear despite her apparent age. "The stone returns to its people through the hands of one who bridges worlds." She released Eliza's hands only to reach for the pendant, lifting it carefully while leaving the cord around the girl's neck. As her fingers touched the turquoise, both pendant and necklace pulsed with visible energy, a brief flare of blue-green light that several watching Apache acknowledged with soft exclamations. "This stone left our people 2 generations ago," Seas Beyond explained, shifting to fluent English for the visitor's benefit. "Taken by soldiers who raided our winter camp. It passed through many hands before finding Swift Hawk's grandfather, who won it in contest with a cavalry officer. Now it returns, bringing the child whose compassion renews ancient promises between peoples." Thomas stepped forward protectively. "The pendant was a gift to my daughter," he said, careful to keep his tone respectful despite his concern. "From Swift Hawk, and thanks for her help." Seas Beyond's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "Yes," she agreed simply, "and it remains hers by right of both gift and destiny. I merely acknowledge its journey and welcome its return among us." She released the pendant, which settled back against Eliza's chest with renewed warmth that felt somehow approving. "Come," the medicine woman continued, gesturing toward the largest wickiup in the encampment. "You must rest before tonight's ceremony. There is much to prepare, much to teach." The following hours passed in whirlwind of activity as the Apache camp prepared for what was clearly considered significant occasion. Thomas and Eliza were provided a guest wickiup, a conical dwelling constructed of branches covered with hides and woven mats, furnished with clean sleeping robes and containers of fresh water. Women brought food, stew rich with meat, and wild vegetables, flatbread cooked on hot stones, dried berries sweetened with wild honey, while Thomas engaged in formal discussions with Cloudmaker and other male leaders, conversations that appeared to cover everything from territorial boundaries to trading opportunities. Eliza found herself drawn into women's circles centered around Seas Beyond. The elder, with assistance from younger women, began Eliza's instruction in basic Apache customs, particularly those relevant to her impending adoption. "The ceremony honors both where you come from and who you will become," Seas Beyond explained. As women prepared special garments for Eliza, a simple dress of soft deerskin, decorated with subtle quillwork patterns along the hem and neckline. "You remain daughter of your father's people while becoming daughter of Apache as well. A bridge between worlds, walking in both with honor." Throughout these preparations, Swift Hawk maintained respectful distance, visible at the camp's periphery. Engaged in conversations with warriors his age, but occasionally glancing toward Eliza, with expression that suggested satisfaction in how events were unfolding. His leg, she noticed, had improved remarkably since their first encounter, though he still favored it slightly when walking. As evening approached, bringing cooler air down from the mountains and painting the sky in spectacular oranges and purples, the camp's atmosphere shifted toward ceremonial formality. A large fire was built in the central clearing, its flames tended by designated elders who added specific woods and herbs that created fragrant smoke rising straight upward in the still air. Eliza, now dressed in the garment prepared for her, found herself seated beside her father on special robes, placed at one edge of the gathering space. Thomas, too, had been provided ceremonial clothing, a beautifully tanned buckskin shirt adorned with simple geometric patterns that somehow complemented his weathered frontier appearance rather than seeming foreign to it. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly as they watched Apache families gather around the fire, their faces solemn yet anticipatory. "We can still return home without offense if you're uncomfortable." Eliza touched the pendant at her throat, which had maintained pleasant coolness throughout the day's activities, occasionally pulsing with subtle temperature changes that now seemed like reassuring communication rather than mysterious occurrence. "I'm certain," she replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "It feels right, Father. Like something important is happening, something bigger than just us." Thomas studied her face for a long moment before nodding once. "Decision made. Your mother would say the same," he acknowledged softly. She always recognized moments that mattered beyond ordinary understanding. Before Eliza could respond, drums began, not thunderous or frightening, but steady heartbeat rhythm that seemed to match the pendant's pulsing against her skin. Seas Beyond emerged from her wickiup, now adorned in full ceremonial regalia that transformed her from elderly woman to embodiment of spiritual authority. Feathers, beads, and intricate quillwork decorated her buckskin dress, while her face had been painted with red and white patterns that emphasized her deep-set eyes and high cheekbones. The medicine woman moved to central position before the fire, raising her arms in gesture that immediately silenced all conversation within the camp. When she spoke, her voice carried surprising power despite her age. The words in Apache language but conveyed with such clarity of purpose that Eliza felt she understood their meaning despite not recognizing the vocabulary. Cloudmaker stepped forward next, assuming position opposite Seas Beyond across the fire. His ceremonial appearance was equally impressive. Eagle feathers arranged in standing headdress, chest adorned with protective breastplate of bone and shell, face painted with bold black and yellow stripes that emphasized his warrior status. What followed was ceremony unlike anything Eliza had witnessed in her frontier upbringing. The adoption ritual combined elements that appealed to multiple senses, rhythmic drumming that seemed to bypass thought and speak directly to the body, fragrant smoke from sacred herbs that cleared the mind while opening awareness to subtle energies, songs in ancient dialect that rose and fell like wind through mountain passes. Through it all, the pendant maintained constant communication with Eliza, through temperature variations that guided her responses, cooling when she should remain still, warming slightly when she should step forward or speak the few Apache words Seas Beyond had taught her during afternoon preparations. The culmination came when Eliza was led to stand between Seas Beyond and Cloudmaker, directly before the fire whose flames now burned with unusual blue-green tint that matched the turquoise at her throat. The medicine woman dipped her fingers in mixture of red ochre and water, drawing simple symbol on Eliza's forehead, a horizontal line intersected by 3 vertical marks that Swift Hawk had earlier explained represented bridge between worlds. "Blood of your blood, bone of your bone," Seas Beyond intoned in English, ensuring Thomas understood the proceedings. Spirit recognizing spirit across the divisions men create. From this night forward, Eliza Thornton carries also the name Turquoise. Water, daughter of Cloudmaker's band, protected by all who honor the ancient agreements between peoples. Cloudmaker stepped forward, placing ceremonial blanket around Eliza's shoulders, lightweight despite its appearance, woven with geometric patterns in blues, whites, and blacks that somehow complemented both the pendant and Eliza's natural coloring. "The child who offered water to the wounded becomes the water that heals divisions," he pronounced formally. "Her father's hearth remains her home, but among Apache she will always find family." As these words echoed across the silent gathering, the pendant at Eliza's throat flared with brilliant luminescence, visible even through the fabric of her dress, momentary but unmistakable pulse of blue-green light that drew soft exclamations from watching Apache. Simultaneously, Seas Beyond's elaborate necklace responded with similar illumination, creating visual confirmation of connection being established. "The stones acknowledge the adoption," the medicine woman announced with satisfaction. "The circle completes." With these words, the ceremony's formal portion concluded, transitioning to celebration that continued well into night. Food was shared abundantly, Stories exchanged between Apache and the visitors, children gradually overcoming shyness to approach Eliza with curious questions about her life among settlers. Throughout these festivities, Thomas observed his daughter with mixture of wonder and pride. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Eliza moved among the Apache with growing confidence, her natural compassion bridging language and cultural differences with surprising ease. The pendant seemed to guide her instinctively toward appropriate responses, cooling when she correctly followed unfamiliar customs, warming slightly when adjustments were needed. Late in the evening, as families began retiring to their wickiups and the celebration quieted, Swift Hawk approached Thomas where he sat somewhat apart, observing rather than fully participating in the festivities. "Your daughter brings honor to both our peoples," the young warrior said without preamble, settling beside Thomas with respectful distance maintained. Thomas studied him thoughtfully before responding. "You knew this would happen," he observed. "When you gave her the pendant, you understood its significance beyond simple gift." Swift Hawk neither confirmed nor denied this directly. "The stone chooses its bearer," he said instead. "I recognized your daughter's spirit when she offered water without fear, when she tended my wound without hesitation. The stone merely confirmed what was already written in the patterns that connect all things." "And what does this adoption truly mean?" Thomas asked, the practical frontier settler reasserting himself. "Beyond ceremony and celebration, what changes for my daughter?" "Everything and nothing," Swift Hawk replied with unexpected philosophical depth. "She remains your child, living in your home, following your ways. But she now carries awareness most settlers never achieve, understanding of the land as living entity, recognition of connections between peoples that transcend boundaries drawn on paper maps." He gestured toward Eliza, now listening intently. As Seas Beyond explained something, using elaborate hand gestures that supplemented her words. "Most importantly, she stands under protection of Cloudmaker's band and all who recognize the sacred stone. In dangerous territory, such protection matters more than rifles or locked doors." Thomas couldn't argue with this assessment. The frontiers. Dangers weren't limited to hostile tribes, unscrupulous land speculators. Corrupt officials, outlaw bands, and natural disasters all threatened isolated homesteads like his. Alliance with respected Apache band offered security beyond what any single settler could establish through physical defenses alone. "She's all I have left," Thomas said finally, rare vulnerability showing through his usual stoic exterior. "Her mother would have understood all this better than I do, the stone, the adoption, the connections between worlds. Elizabeth always sensed things beyond ordinary sight." Swift Hawk nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "Your wife walks with the ancestors now, but her spirit continues through your daughter. The stone recognizes bloodlines that carry special gifts, awareness that extends beyond physical senses." He gestured toward the pendant visible at Eliza's throat, glowing softly in the dying firelight. "It does not create such gifts but awakens what already sleeps within." This conversation was interrupted by Eliza herself, approaching with mixture of excitement and fatigue evident in her expression. The day's events, from dramatic morning encounter with Apache warriors to elaborate evening ceremony, had clearly taxed her endurance despite her obvious enthusiasm. "Father," she said, settling beside him with natural grace that somehow incorporated both her frontier upbringing and newly acquired Apache mannerisms. "Seas Beyond says I should learn plant medicine when we return tomorrow. She says Mother Nature speaks to those who wear the sacred stone, showing which plants heal and which harm." Thomas exchanged glance with Swift Hawk, mutual understanding passing between them despite their different backgrounds. "Your mother would approve," he said simply, drawing Eliza close in rare demonstrative gesture. "She always believed in learning from everyone, regardless of where they came from." As father and daughter prepared for sleep in their guest wickiup, the camp gradually quieting around them, Eliza found herself reflecting on the extraordinary day's events. The pendant, cool and reassuring against her skin, seemed to pulse in rhythm with her thoughts, acknowledging their significance beyond what words could express. "Father," she whispered as they settled onto comfortable sleeping robes. Scout curled protectively at their feet. "Do you think things will be different when we return home?" Thomas considered this question with uncharacteristic thoughtfulness. "The land remains the same," he said finally. "Our cabin stands where it always has. The garden needs tending and the animals feeding." He paused, looking at his daughter with new awareness. "But yes, something fundamental has changed. Connections have been established that can't be broken. Understanding has been gained that can't be unlearned." He touched the pendant gently, with respect rather than skepticism. "Your mother would say doors have opened between worlds, and such openings change everything they touch." Eliza nodded, somehow comprehending meaning beyond the literal words. As sleep claimed her, the pendant maintained its gentle communication, cooling reassuringly, occasionally warming slightly when her dreams touched on significant memories or possibilities. Throughout the night, it maintained constant conversation, with her developing awareness, guiding her toward deeper understanding of the bridge she had begun to become between distinct yet interconnected worlds. In the wickiup reserved for honored warriors, Swift Hawk too reflected on the day's significance. His injury, nearly healed now through combination of Eliza's initial care and medicine applied by Seas Beyond upon their arrival, had served purpose. Beyond his understanding when he first fled the hunters across unfamiliar territory. What had seemed random chance, encountering a settler child with unusual courage and compassion, now revealed itself as part of larger pattern. Connection established across divisions that usually separated peoples with long histories of conflict. The sacred stone had found its way home while remaining with its chosen bearer, frontier child whose natural gifts would now develop under protection of both worlds. In dangerous territory where misunderstandings too often led to bloodshed, such bridges between peoples offered rare hope for different future, one where differences enriched rather than divided, where ancient wisdom and new ways might find balance that honored both. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with delicate pinks and golds, both Apache camp and its honored guests slept peacefully, unaware that their unique connection would soon face tests beyond ceremony and celebration. Challenges that would require all the courage, wisdom and cooperation this newly established bridge between worlds could facilitate. The 7 days of Eliza and Thomas's stay among Cloudmaker's band passed with extraordinary swiftness, each sunrise bringing new teachings that expanded their understanding of Apache ways. For Eliza, the experience transformed her perspective on everything from medicine to storytelling, from the relationship between people and land to the deeper meanings contained within everyday objects. Seas Beyond took particular interest in Eliza's education, spending hours each day teaching the girl to identify medicinal plants, to understand weather patterns through subtle signs others might miss, and to recognize the unique energies that flowed through specific locations across the landscape. The elderly medicine woman treated Eliza not as a child to be indulged, but as a serious student with innate gifts requiring proper development. "The stone chose you because these abilities already existed within," Seas Beyond explained during one lesson as they gathered willow bark for pain remedies. "It does not create what is not there, but awakens what sleeps inside, connecting you to knowledge your ancestors carried." The pendant remained Eliza's constant companion, its temperature fluctuations becoming increasingly meaningful as she learned to interpret their patterns. Cold signaled safety and rightness, warmth indicated caution or need for adjustment, while occasional pulses in specific directions drew her attention to important elements she might otherwise overlook. Thomas, initially more reserved about their situation, gradually opened himself to the experience as well. Cloudmaker and other tribal leaders engaged him in extensive discussions about territorial boundaries, sharing hunting grounds, and potential trade relationships that could benefit both communities. The warrior Swift Hawk often served as intermediary. In these conversations, his facility with English and understanding of both cultures, creating bridges of communication where misunderstandings might otherwise arise. Your daughter's compassion created opportunity few settlers ever receive. Swift Hawk observed to Thomas during a hunting expedition on the 5th day, as they trapped deer through pine forests high above the summer camp. Knowledge shared freely, rather than discovered through conflict or stolen through deception. Thomas nodded thoughtfully, his initial wariness giving way to genuine appreciation. Elizabeth, my wife, would have understood this connection immediately, he acknowledged. She always insisted there was more to the world than what ordinary eyes perceive. On their final evening in the Apache camp, a special ceremony was held to honor the strengthened alliance between Cloudmaker's band and the Thornton family. Gifts were exchanged, beautifully tanned buckskins and intricately woven baskets for Thomas and Eliza, coffee and salt from the Thornton supplies for the Apache. More significantly, formal promises were made and witnessed by the entire community. From this day forward, Cloudmaker proclaimed, standing beside Thomas before the central fire, the valley where Thomas Thornton builds his home stands under protection of our people. No Apache from any band who recognizes our authority will bring harm to his family or property. He glanced meaningfully at Eliza, who sat beside Seas Beyond wearing the ceremonial blanket she had received during her adoption. In return, his hearth remains open to our people in times of need, and his daughter's healing gifts available to those who seek them with proper respect. Thomas, following Swift Hawk's earlier coaching, responded with appropriate formality. My home welcomes Cloudmaker's people as friends and allies, he stated firmly. My daughter's skills, learned from your wisdom, will serve all who come in. Peace, this I promise before these witnesses. Seas Beyond rose next, approaching Eliza with reverence that seemed extraordinary directed toward a child, yet which acknowledged something beyond physical age. Turquoise water carries two names. Now walks in two worlds with equal belonging, the medicine woman announced. The sacred stone has chosen its bearer wisely, connecting bloodlines long separated by misunderstanding. She presented Eliza with final gift, a small leather pouch containing specially prepared herbs and minerals. For healing beyond what ordinary remedies can accomplish, she explained quietly. Use when the stone's guidance directs you, for wounds of spirit as well as body. As dawn broke on their departure day, the entire Apache band gathered to witness their leaving. Unlike their arrival, which had proceeded under armed escort through unfamiliar territory, their return journey would be guided by Swift Hawk and two other warriors who would ensure their safe passage home and formally mark the boundaries of protected territory around the Thornton homestead. Eliza found herself unexpectedly emotional as they prepared to leave, having formed connections with several Apache children and women during their stay. The pendant at her throat maintained steady coolness, however, suggesting rightness in this transition despite the complexity of her feelings. You return to your father's hearth, but remain daughter of our people, Seas Beyond reminded her, embracing the girl with surprising strength for one of her advanced years. Distance changes nothing about belonging. The stone will continue teaching. You and I will visit when seasons change to continue your learning. Thomas, mounting his horse with newfound ease after days of riding with Apache guides, nodded respectfully to Cloudmaker. Your hospitality honors us, he said simply. My home stands open to you in return. Their journey homeward followed. Different paths than their outward travel, Swift Hawk deliberately showing them alternative routes that might prove valuable in different seasons or circumstances. Throughout this trek, he continued Eliza's education, pointing out landmarks visible only to those who knew to look for them, explaining how various plants changed their properties with the seasons, and demonstrating tracking techniques that revealed entire stories written in disturbed soil or bent grass stems. By midday of their second travel day, they crested the final ridge overlooking the Thornton homestead. From this vantage point, the cabin appeared undisturbed, thin smoke rising from the chimney, suggesting that someone had maintained the fire in their absence, fulfilling Cloudmaker's promise that their property would be watched over while they were gone. "All seems well," Swifthawk observed, scanning the valley with the practiced eye of a hunter. No signs of the bounty hunters returning or other strangers passing through. Thomas nodded, visible relief softening his weathered features. Despite the extraordinary experience of their time with the Apache, returning home carried special significance for a man who had built his life around this small clearing carved from wilderness. As they descended toward the cabin, Eliza noticed the pendant's temperature shifting subtly, not the alarming heat of danger, but a gentle warmth, suggesting attention should be paid to something not immediately obvious. Following this guidance, she studied their approach path more carefully, eventually spotting what had triggered the pendant's warning: fresh horse tracks leading toward their home from the western ridge. "Father," she said quietly, pointing toward the sign Swifthawk had taught her to recognize. "Someone has visited while we were away." Thomas immediately tensed, hand moving toward the rifle secured to his saddle, but Swifthawk raised a cautioning hand after examining the tracks more closely. "Army horses," he observed, "not bounty hunters. 2 riders, probably scouts or messengers. They departed yesterday by this same path." He glanced at Thomas with meaningful expression. "The bluecoats sometimes check isolated homesteads when tensions rise with Apache bands. They may return, seeking information." Thomas understood the implications immediately. Their alliance with Cloudmaker's people, while invaluable for their security in this isolated territory, could potentially raise suspicions among military authorities always alert for settlers who maintained unauthorized relationships with indigenous peoples. "We'll need to be careful about visitors," he acknowledged, exchanging glance with Swifthawk that conveyed mutual understanding. "Some might misinterpret our new friendships." Upon reaching the cabin, they found everything precisely as they had left it, though with subtle signs of the protective watch maintained in their absence. Fresh firewood stacked beside the stove, garden watered despite the dry weather, and chicken feed replenished. These careful attentions had been performed with such discretion that ordinary observers would notice nothing unusual, yet ensured the homestead remained viable during their absence. Swifthawk and his companions declined Thomas's invitation to rest inside the cabin, preferring to complete an important aspect of their mission, the formal marking of protective boundaries around Thornton land. This process, Swifthawk explained, involved placing small, specially prepared bundles at strategic points, forming invisible perimeter that would be recognized by all Apache familiar with traditional signs. These markers carried dual meaning, he told Eliza as she accompanied him to the first boundary point, a distinctive lightning-struck pine overlooking the creek where she had first encountered him. "For our people, they declare this land and its inhabitants under Cloudmaker's protection. For those with eyes to see beyond ordinary sight, they establish connections to the spirit world that strengthen defensive energies around your home." As Swifthawk secured the small bundle, wrapped in red cloth and containing objects Eliza couldn't identify, high in the pine's branches, the pendant at her throat pulsed with pleasant coolness, acknowledging completion of significant connection. This response repeated at each of the 4 boundary points they marked, creating protective square around the Thornton property. The final marker placed, Swifthawk returned to where Thomas waited with the other warriors near the cabin. The moment held ceremonial significance despite its outward simplicity, formal completion of alliance that transcended ordinary frontier relationships between settlers and indigenous peoples. "My people honor courage and compassion equally," Swifthawk said to Thomas, the formal cadence of his speech indicating the word's importance. Your daughter showed both when offering water to wounded stranger. Cloudmaker's band remembers such actions across generations. Thomas, who had witnessed his daughter's remarkable growth during their time among the Apache, nodded with newfound respect for traditions he might previously have dismissed as superstition. The friendship between our families brings honor to both, he replied, using phrasing Swift Hawk had taught him during their hunting expedition days earlier. As the Apache prepared to depart, Swift Hawk approached Eliza one final time, kneeling to meet her at eye level rather than standing above her. "The stone continues its teaching," he said quietly, gesturing toward the pendant visible at her throat. "Listen with heart as well as mind when it speaks through warmth and coolness. Will I see you again?" Eliza asked, echo of the question she had posed during their first encounter beside the creek. Swift Hawk's normally composed features softened. "Slightly. The sacred stone connects us beyond distance," he replied. "I will return when the first snow touches these mountains, bringing winter teachings from seas beyond." He touched the pendant briefly, a gesture of respect rather than farewell. "Until then, turquoise water, practice what you have learned. And watch for signs in unexpected places." With these parting words, Swift Hawk and his companions mounted their horses and departed, moving with the fluid efficiency Eliza had come to associate with Apache travel, leaving no unnecessary traces, wasting no movements, becoming one with the landscape rather than imposing themselves upon it. As father and daughter stood watching until the warriors disappeared beyond the western ridge, Thomas placed gentle hand on Eliza's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," he said simply. "She always believed in building bridges rather than walls." Eliza leaned against her father's solid presence, drawing comfort from his rare expression of emotional connection. The pendant rested cool and reassuring against her skin, its steady presence, a reminder of extraordinary journey they had undertaken and the new understanding they had gained. "Things will be different now," she observed, not question but statement of recognition. Thomas nodded, surveying their homestead with fresh perspective. "The land remains the same," he acknowledged, "but we see it differently. That changes everything." In the weeks that followed their return, life at the Thornton homestead resumed its familiar rhythms with subtle but significant transformations. Thomas continued hunting, trapping, and maintaining their property as before, but now approached these tasks with heightened awareness of sharing the territory rather than merely claiming it. He began marking his trap lines with small signs Swift Hawk had taught him, indications visible to Apache hunters that would prevent accidental interference, while respecting their continued presence in the broader territory. For Eliza, the changes were more profound. Her daily chores remained largely unchanged, gathering water, tending the garden, caring for chickens, but she now performed these tasks with deeper connection to the land itself. Plants she had previously seen as merely useful or decorative revealed medicinal properties under seas beyond's teachings. Weather patterns became readable through subtle signs in cloud formations, animal behaviors, and the pendant's occasional temperature shifts. Most significantly, Eliza began developing her healing abilities, starting with minor applications that gradually expanded as her confidence grew. She treated a deep cut on her father's hand using poultice made from plants seas beyond had shown her reducing inflammation and preventing infection that might otherwise have proven dangerous so far from proper medical care. When one of their chickens fell ill with symptoms she recognized from Apache teachings, she successfully nursed it back to health using techniques that combined her mother's practical approaches with indigenous knowledge. The pendant remained her constant guide, its temperature variations becoming increasingly nuanced as her sensitivity developed. Beyond simple warnings of danger or confirmations of safety, it now communicated subtler messages, drawing her attention to particular plants needed for specific remedies, indicating optimal timing for harvesting or treatment, sometimes even guiding her dreams toward knowledge she would need in coming days. 6 weeks after their return from the Apache camp, the pendant's guidance faced its first significant test. Thomas, returning from trading journey to Pine Springs, brought news that troubled their peaceful routine. "Cavalry patrol came through the settlement yesterday," he reported as they shared simple supper of rabbit stew. "Lieutenant named Carson, asking questions about settler relationships with local Apache bands, specifically mentioned our valley." Eliza felt the pendant warm slightly against her skin. Not danger yet, but situation requiring attention. "What kind of questions?" she asked, careful to keep her voice casual despite the concern rising within her. "Whether anyone trades regularly with Apache, whether unusual movement has been noticed in recent months." Thomas's weathered face revealed little emotion, but tension showed in his shoulders. "Prescott mentioned seeing smoke from our direction when we were gone." The lieutenant seemed particularly interested in that. "What did you tell them?" Eliza's hand moved instinctively to the pendant, drawing reassurance from its steady presence. "That I occasionally encounter peaceful Apache while hunting, but maintain proper distance," Thomas replied. "That smoke probably came from controlled burning of cleared brush, which they have known was common practice. If they understood anything about maintaining homesteads." His rare display of sarcasm suggested deeper concern than his words conveyed. "They seemed satisfied for now, but I expect they'll patrol through here within the week." This prediction proved accurate 3 days later when Scout's alert barking announced approach of riders from the direction of Pine Springs. The pendant at Eliza's throat warmed noticeably, though not with urgent heat that would signal immediate threat, more cautionary awareness requiring preparation. Through the cabin's window, Eliza observed 4 cavalrymen approaching their clearing, led by a young officer whose precise posture and immaculate uniform contrasted sharply with the more weathered appearance of his subordinates. "Lieutenant Carson," she presumed, coming to investigate their homestead directly rather than relying on second-hand reports from neighbors. "Remember what we discussed," Thomas said quietly as he moved toward the door to greet their visitors. "Simple answers, nothing about our time with Cloudmaker's people." Eliza nodded, though conflict rose within her at the necessary deception. The pendant's warmth increased slightly, acknowledging the challenging balance she now navigated between her two worlds. The lieutenant proved initially cordial, introducing himself with military precision while explaining his patrol's purpose in terms that attempted diplomacy while conveying underlying suspicion. "Routine checks on isolated homesteads, Mr. Thornton," he explained after dismounting. "Recent intelligence suggests increased Apache movement through these territories. We're concerned for settler safety, of course." "Appreciate the concern," Thomas replied with carefully measured politeness. "Though we've had no troubles here. Keep to ourselves mostly." Lieutenant Carson's gaze swept the property with trained assessment, noting details that might escape casual observation. The well-maintained garden with its companion planting arrangement, uncommon among most settlers. The particular way firewood had been stacked following methods Swift Hawk had demonstrated, subtle boundary markers visible to those who knew to look for them. "Your neighbors mentioned you were absent from your property for nearly a week last month," he observed, tone casual but eyes sharp. "Unusual for homesteaders to leave established claims unattended for so long." Thomas met the officer's gaze steadily. "Family business in Santa Fe," he answered with prepared explanation they had agreed upon. "My wife's cousin fallen ill. Neighbor boy from Prescott Place checked on things while we were gone." The lieutenant nodded, though something in his expression suggested he found the explanation insufficient. His attention shifted to Eliza, who had remained near the garden, apparently occupied with harvesting vegetables but actually maintaining careful awareness of the conversation. "Your daughter?" he inquired, moving toward her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Eliza," Thomas confirmed, following closely. "Only family I have left since her mother passed last winter." Something in this statement, perhaps the genuine emotion underlying Thomas's typically restrained manner seemed to soften the lieutenant's approach slightly. He addressed Eliza directly, crouching to meet her at eye level in gesture that unconsciously mirrored Swift Hawk's respectful approach before departing. "Hello, Miss Thornton," he said, voice gentler than when addressing her father. "That's quite an interesting necklace you're wearing." Eliza felt the pendant warm against her skin, cautioning careful response. The turquoise stone remained visible above her dress collar, impossible to conceal without drawing more attention through obvious attempt at hiding it. "It was my mother's," she replied, surprising herself with how naturally the protective lie came to her lips. "Father gave it to me after she died." Lieutenant Carson studied the pendant with unexpected intensity, recognition flickering in his expression. "Interesting workmanship," he observed. "Not typical of jewelry from Eastern territories." "My wife traded for it years ago," Thomas interjected smoothly. "From passing merchants heading to California. She always had eye for unusual pieces." The lieutenant held Eliza's gaze for an uncomfortable moment, seeming to search for something beyond her words. The pendant's warmth increased further, though still not reaching alarming levels, suggesting caution rather than immediate threat. "Well, Miss Thornton," he said finally, rising to his full height, "you're fortunate to have such a dedicated father looking after you in these dangerous territories." "Yes, sir," Eliza agreed simply, instinctively understanding that additional words might reveal more than was safe. After brief inspection of the property's perimeter, during which one of the soldiers noted tracks near the creek that suggested recent Apache passage, the cavalry patrol prepared to depart. Lieutenant Carson offered final warnings about maintaining vigilance against hostile indigenous elements, and instructions to report any unusual sightings immediately to the garrison at Fort Stanton. As the soldiers rode away toward the Prescott homestead, Eliza felt the pendant gradually cool against her skin, suggesting immediate concern had passed, though situation remained worthy of attention. Thomas watched until the patrol disappeared beyond the ridge before turning to his daughter with troubled expression. "They recognized your pendant," he observed quietly. "The lieutenant has seen its like before." Eliza nodded, hand rising instinctively to touch the turquoise stone. "He knew it was Apache work," she confirmed. "But I don't think he believes." "It was Mother's." Thomas sighed heavily, frontier pragmatism asserting itself. "We'll need to be more careful," he acknowledged. "Perhaps keep the pendant beneath your clothing when strangers visit. The alliance with Cloudmaker's people brings protection we need, but some would view it as betrayal of our own kind." This observation captured the complex reality they now navigated, bridge between worlds that offered security and knowledge while simultaneously creating new vulnerabilities. The pendant cooled further against Eliza's skin, suggesting approval of her father's caution while simultaneously reaffirming the rightness of their chosen path. That evening, as shadows lengthened across their valley and Thomas checked boundary markers with newfound appreciation for their significance, Eliza found herself drawn to the creek where her extraordinary journey had begun. The spot where she had first encountered Swift Hawk now held special resonance, marked by subtle changes visible only to those who knew to look for them. A small arrangement of stones placed in pattern meaningful to Apache, certain plants flourishing where ceremonial water had been poured during boundary marking. As she knelt beside the flowing water, reflecting on how profoundly her life had changed through one simple act of compassion, the pendant at her throat pulsed with gentle coolness that spread throughout her body like silent communication. Without conscious thought, she found herself speaking aloud to the stone as if conversing with distant friend. "I understand why you chose me now," she said softly, fingers tracing the turquoise surface with newfound appreciation for its deeper meanings. "Not because I'm special, but because bridges need building between people who see the world differently." The pendant's response came as subtle pulse of coolness that somehow conveyed affirmation beyond words. In that moment, Eliza glimpsed future possibilities unfolding from her unique position between worlds, healing work that would transcend physical remedies to address deeper divisions, understanding that might prevent bloodshed through translation. Across cultural boundaries, knowledge preserved through respectful sharing rather than lost to misunderstanding or deliberate destruction. As sunset painted the western mountains with brilliant oranges and purples, Eliza rose from beside the creek with renewed sense of purpose. The pendant hung cool and reassuring against her skin, its presence reminder of responsibilities that came with gifts. She turned toward home where lamplight glowed welcome through cabin windows, carrying water not just for household needs, but as symbol of connection flowing between separate yet interconnected worlds. The little girl who had shared her water with wounded Apache brave now understood that seemingly small acts of compassion could ripple outward with consequences beyond imagination. The pendant at her throat, once mysterious gift from stranger, had become tangible reminder of bridges built through courage, compassion, and willingness to see beyond artificial boundaries that divided peoples who shared common land and common humanity. As stars appeared in deepening twilight sky, Eliza whispered traditional Apache blessings seas beyond had taught her, words of gratitude for connections that transcended visible world, acknowledgement of responsibilities that came with special knowledge, and commitment to path that honored both her father's practical frontier wisdom and the profound spiritual understanding of her adopted Apache family. The sacred stone returned to its rightful bearer through seemingly random encounter. Beside isolated creek, pulsed once with approval. The circle had indeed completed itself, creating new beginning rather than ending, bridge between worlds that would shape not just one child's destiny, but perhaps the future of entire valley where ancient wisdom and frontier determination might yet find harmonious connection through unexpected guardian who carried water between divided peoples. Autumn transformed the Sacramento Mountains with breathtaking swiftness, painting the aspen groves in brilliant gold while dusting the highest peaks with early snow. For Eliza, now approaching her 9th birthday, the changing season brought heightened awareness of natural cycles and deeper appreciation for the knowledge Swift Hawk and Seas Beyond had shared during summer's extraordinary events. The pendant remained her constant companion, its subtle temperature variations guiding her growing abilities with increasing precision as her sensitivity developed. True to his promise, Swift Hawk returned when the first significant snowfall whitened the mountain ridges above their valley. He arrived without fanfare one crisp November morning, materializing at their doorstep with the silent efficiency that characterized Apache movement. Scout, who would normally alert them to approaching strangers, simply wagged his tail in greeting, recognizing the visitor as friend rather than threat. "The season's turn," Swift Hawk observed as Thomas welcomed him inside. "Time for winter teachings before deep snows close the high passes." He carried gifts from Cloudmaker's band, dried meat prepared to last through winter months, medicinal herbs unavailable in the Thorntons' immediate territory, and most precious of all, a deerskin journal filled with plant drawings and healing knowledge recorded by Seas Beyond, specifically for Eliza's continued education. "The old one says knowledge must live in many forms," Swift Hawk explained as Eliza reverently examined the detailed illustrations. Words spoken aloud, patterns observed in nature, and marks preserved on lasting materials. Each form protects wisdom in different ways when challenges arise. These challenges, he informed them over shared meal of venison stew, had intensified since their summer visit to the Apache camp. Lieutenant Carson's patrol represented growing military presence throughout the territory, with increased pressure on all indigenous peoples, regardless of their peaceful intentions or previous agreements. With settlers, the Bluecoats do not differentiate between bands that seek peace and those that resist, Swift Hawk explained, his normally composed features showing rare frustration. "They push all Apache toward reservation lands, where our ways cannot be maintained. where children sicken and elders lose hope. Thomas listened with troubled expression, frontier pragmatism balanced against newfound understanding of Apache perspective. The settlement gossip confirms increasing tensions, he acknowledged. More patrols, stricter regulations about trading. With indigenous peoples, talk of forcing all Apache onto designated territories regardless of their history in different regions. The pendant at Eliza's throat warmed slightly as this conversation progressed, not warning of immediate danger, but acknowledging situation requiring careful attention. She had noticed this pattern developing over recent months, the stones. Communication becoming increasingly nuanced as her sensitivity deepened through practice and experience. "What does this mean for our agreement with Cloudmaker's band?" she asked, addressing Swift Hawk directly with confidence that would have been impossible before summer's transformative events. Swift Hawk considered her question with characteristic thoroughness before responding. "True alliances endure despite changing circumstances," he said finally. "Cloudmaker's protection remains over your valley, but maintaining connection becomes more challenging when boundaries tighten." He glanced meaningfully at the pendant. "The sacred stone becomes even more important now, bridge between worlds when physical meetings grow dangerous." That evening, after Thomas retired to his room, Swift Hawk provided Eliza's first winter, teaching beside the glowing hearth. Unlike summer's learning among the full Apache band, these lessons focus specifically on developing her unique abilities as bridge between cultures, particularly the pendant's guidance system, the stone. "Speaks through temperature and occasional light," Swift Hawk explained, his voice dropping to teaching cadence Eliza had come to recognize. "But its fullest communication remains untapped without proper training. Tonight we begin dreamwalking, connecting to ancestral wisdom while your body rests." Eliza listened with mixture of excitement and apprehension as Swift Hawk described. Technique passed down through generations of medicine people. By focusing specific thoughts toward the pendant before sleep, maintaining physical contact with the stone throughout the night, and repeating certain Apache phrases as consciousness transitioned toward dreaming, she could potentially access deeper knowledge than waking instruction could provide. "Will it be dangerous?" she asked, practical frontier upbringing asserting itself despite her openness to indigenous teachings. Swift Hawk's expression softened slightly. "Not dangerous, but challenging," he clarified. "Dreams become doorways rather than mere reflections of daily thoughts. You may encounter spirit guides, visit places your physical body has never seen, receive teachings from ancestors long walked beyond. The stone protects throughout these journeys, preventing your spirit from wandering too far from your body." That night, following Swift Hawk's detailed instructions, Eliza experienced her first intentional dream walk. As consciousness slipped toward sleep with the pendant clutched in her small hand, she felt distinct sensation of expansion, as if her awareness extended beyond physical form while maintaining connection to it through the stone's steady coolness. The dreamscape that unfolded transcended ordinary nighttime imaginings in both clarity and significance. She found herself walking familiar territory, their valley and surrounding mountains, but seeing it through transformed perspective that revealed previously invisible dimensions. For people caught between worlds as we find ourselves now, the pendant cooled reassuringly against Eliza's skin, confirmation of challenge acknowledged alongside capacity to meet it, developing within the unusual partnership between frontier child and sacred stone. Beyond cabin walls, snow continued falling, temporary barrier against immediate, external threats while creating space for essential preparation before inevitable confrontations resumed with spring thaw. As winter deepened around their isolated homestead, Eliza continued strengthening abilities awakened through extraordinary summer events and refined through autumn's teachings. The bridge between worlds initially created through simple act of compassion, water shared with wounded stranger, had evolved into something more profound than either she or her father could have imagined when following their isolated frontier existence just months earlier. The sacred stone returned to its chosen bearer through seeming chance encounter beside remote creek, maintained steady communication through temperature variations and dream-walking connections that transcended physical isolation imposed by winter weather and increasing military restrictions. Through this guidance, Eliza developed healing abilities that served practical needs while preparing for greater challenges clearly approaching with changing seasons. Each night, as snow piled higher on their cabin and temperatures dropped, beneath star-filled skies, she traveled dream paths with growing confidence, learning from ancestral guides, receiving specific teachings impossible to communicate through ordinary waking instruction, and gradually understanding her unique position as bridge between divided peoples whose connections remained essential despite external forces working to permanently separate them. The turquoise pendant, cool and reassuring against her skin through frigid winter nights, pulsed occasionally with gentle reminder that some boundaries exist only through limited perception rather than essential reality. The little girl who had offered water to wounded brave increasingly recognized that compassion itself formed strongest bridge between supposedly separate worlds, connection that transcended artificial divisions with potential to heal wounds deeper than those visible to ordinary sight. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.